Get the latest Impact Podcast right into your inbox each week. Subscribe by entering your email address at impactpodcast.com to make sure you never miss an interview. This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by ERI. ERI has a mission to protect people, the planet, and your privacy, and is the largest fully integrated IT and electronics asset disposition provider and cybersecurity-focused hardware destruction company in the United States, and maybe even the world. For more information on how ERI can help your business properly dispose of outdated electronic hardware devices, please visit eridirect.com. This episode of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by Closed Loop Partners. Closed Loop Partners is a leading circular economy investor in the United States with an extensive network of Fortune 500 corporate investors, family offices, institutional investors, industry experts, and impact partners. Closed Loop's platform spans the arc of capital from venture capital to private equity, bridging gaps and fostering synergies to scale the circular economy. To find Closed Loop Partners, please go to www.closedlooppartners.com. Welcome to another edition of the Impact Podcast. I'm John Shigarian, and I'm so honored to have with us today Mary Mazzoni. She's the executive editor of TriplePundit. Welcome, Mary, to the Impact Podcast.
Thanks, John. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, as we discussed off the air a little bit, you are in line with your two predecessors, Nick Astor, who's the founder of TriplePundit, who came on the show in 2015, and then Leon Kay, the former executive editor, who came on in 2021. So it's so great to have you on to share the continued journey. As you and I know, there's no finish line in sustainability. There's no finish line really in business, businesses that are supposed to be around and are being run well. So it's just really fun to have the continuum of you following Nick and Leon, who were just wonderful guests as well.
So thrilled to be here and continue up the trend, and happy to be in their company for sure.
Mary, before we get going and talking about all the great things you and your colleagues are doing at TriplePundit, can you share a little bit about your backstory? Where did you grow up and how did you get on this fascinating and important journey that you're on?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in rural Pennsylvania. I was the only child of parents who were both working in services for people with disabilities. My dad worked as a job coach for over 30 years. My mom was in special education. So their value set towards service to community was really something that shaped my viewpoint a lot, kind of working my way through life out here. And I was also really interested in journalism, even as a kid. I started a class newspaper in the 5th grade. I was on the staff of our high school newspaper, but I actually left in protest because I thought they were censoring my editorial. So I was kind of a pain even then, but I kind of feel like people who were a pain as a kid grow up to be good reporters. So it worked out well for me, but really pursued it at college. When moved to Philadelphia, attended Temple University and was really happy to pursue that passion there, but really fortunate in particular to attend Temple. A lot of their professors in their journalism departments, yes, go out. And they have the rep for a reason, really. They're stellar program. Most of their professors are adjuncts who are working in the field. So folks who are actively editing, the Philadelphia Inquirer or Daily News newspapers, the local broadcast affiliates or Philadelphia Magazine. So these are folks who are actively working in the field today, who are giving of their time to really help foster the next generation of journalists. So I was really, really fortunate to have studied under a number of them and really kind of get that foundational knowledge to move forward with, in journalism as a field. But how I ended up in sustainability, impact journalism in particular, kind of happened almost by accident. I was kind of looking around and seeing this covered a bit more in the media. This was around, to date myself, around 2009. So, a number of years ago now. But it was really starting to begin to trend. More people were talking about it in the press. And I was personally interested in it. I grew up rurally. We composted, we recycled, we volunteered, so it was something that I had a personal interest in. But I noticed that not many of my classmates were ever really claiming these topics as beats for our projects. So I started claiming them. And then I happened to get, internships at sustainability related publications. And really the rest is history. I worked at the editorial arm of a recycling location platform called Earth 911 out of college, transitioned into a couple other, reporting and editing roles, and ultimately landed at TriplePundit around 2013 or so, and have been contributing on and off as a writer and as an editor ever since. Really happy to have seen the platform grow as the space has grown and as so many more people have gotten into this conversation.
Talk a little bit. Well, let me ask you this: when you were growing up and you're already in fifth grade, getting involved in the journalism world, who was your number one inspiration? If you could be any journalist out there that exists today or is past, who's your favorite that exists?
Oh man. I mean, I've always looked up to, Walter Cronkite, the voice of like this calming voice, right, of
Right.
the nation, no matter what the issue was, times that were frightening, times that were uncertain, this steady voice appeared, to usher people through this. And I feel like there's a long legacy of journalists who have played that role, either through reassurance, a steady voice amidst the chaos, or also really necessary truth telling. You look at other writers like a James Baldwin or Toni Morrison, where people are just out there telling truths that need to be told in a bold way. And I feel like I always wanted to be a part of something like that, to hear what people said that wasn't really being talked about a lot, that others should hear, and really be part of facilitating more people hearing about.
Interesting. Walter Cronkite. I would never have expected you would have said that. Talk about an old school name. But yeah, he was my generation. He was the voice of America. And then we had the whole generation of Brokaw and Jennings and Rather, and they were the legends of and then you had the women journalists too. You had Connie Chung and Katie Couric and another whole range. So it's fascinating. So you joined in 2013. It's 2025. When did you decide that you wanted to stick in this, as you said, impact journalism, solutions journalism, and grow your role there?
So, I mean, TriplePundit is fantastic. It's a really great platform. It was founded by Nick Astor back in 2005. So we're celebrating our 20th, last year coming into this year. And he launched the site really as a side project with some of his classmates in the first class of Presidio University's MBA program, which was the first in the nation to have a focus specifically on sustainability. So the site really grew as the space grew. It was there at the very beginning and has really been a fantastic platform for career journalists as well as experts who are working in impact fields to really share their perspectives on these kind of emerging concepts as they came to the fore and as they grew and became more mainstream. Now it's really something that everyone's talking about. But when you think back to those days, it was very rare to hear people talking about corporate sustainability, corporate responsibility. Not as many companies by far were reporting on these issues. So it was kind of still considered to be very much a niche topic. It always seemed like there was so much more potential to this, at least to me. When you hear people talking about the foundations of corporate responsibility, sustainability, as you know, like it's just good business, right? This is how you operate a business, to take responsibility for the externalities that you create, but also to grow for the long term. You have to be aware of the risks that are ahead of you, but also fostering positive relationships with the communities where you operate and really getting that social license to be able to continue to grow in those communities. They want you there. They view you as a positive partner versus viewing you as extractive or as a negative actor, right? In your community, you're looking at them as positive actors. So I feel like that was something that I saw a ton of potential in. All of the contributors and editors at TriplePundit over the years have been super excited proponents of this work. So I really kind of fell into writing roles early on and became an editor pretty early in my journey with 3P. And I've really been excited to have gotten to review and see all of the contributions we've gotten over the past 10 years. It's really interesting to see how it's evolved.
You're young.
Sure.
You're still very young. When did you become the executive editor?
I became the executive editor in 2023 and also helped to kind of at that time usher our transition to solely a solutions journalism platform. So TriplePundit's always kind of considered itself, we used to describe ourselves as cautious optimists, right? Where it's like, where you look, you're like, it's kind of like a trust but verify. And we've always really taken that eye towards solutions reporting, but we never really formally adopted solutions journalism as the lens through which we tell stories. It's something that not a lot of folks have heard about, but it's definitely out there. The Solutions Journalism Network has been promoting this style of reporting for over a decade. It's used by around 2,000 newsrooms worldwide as a way to tell stories. And probably most people have seen it, but they're just not aware that they've seen it. So I'm excited to chat a bit more about that today as well.
Well, yeah, that's important. I want to get into that. That's a really important topic. We haven't covered it here, which is to me even the shock, given that we're the Impact Podcast, and that's literally what we also do on a regular basis. But let's go back. How many writers, both full-time or part-time, are submitting pieces to you, and how often do you put out your wonderful product?
Yeah, so particularly with our renewed focus on solutions journalism, on original journalism, solutions journalism does take time, so we publish a bit less frequently than we used to. At our peak, we were probably publishing 15 stories or so a day. Really, every piece of news about corporate sustainability or responsibility, we probably had some piece of coverage up about that. With the depth of some of our more recent reporting, it does require a decrease in volume. We do have a new solutions story up every weekday. There's kind of peels back a layer on the corporate side of things, as well as just how innovators across fields, whether it's folks who are working in communities, startup founders, nonprofits, governments, are exploring interventions that are being proven to be effective at solving some of the problems that we face, and really taking a closer look at that. We have a pool of about, I'd say, 12 to 15 regular contributors who are spanned worldwide. We're always interested in expanding that pool of contributors. We also are fortunate to publish a lot of guest contributions from folks who are working in CSR, corporate sustainability, impact investing roles, to really share more about what they're seeing firsthand in the field and how that could really impact the way our audience looks and perceives things.
That's fascinating. So talk a little bit about, on a day-to-day basis, how do you spend your time on a day-to-day basis?
Well, it's definitely a balancing act because I'm serve as the executive editor of TriplePundit. I'm also the VP of content for our parent company, 3PL, which is an impact communications partner for companies and nonprofits. We work with organizations to help them tell their impact stories. So while the day-to-day duties of both of those roles are very much separate, there kind of is a lot of overlap. I feel like I learned so much from 3PL's roster of corporate and nonprofit clients, just about the unique challenges they're seeing in their fields and how they're looking to navigate that, and really exploring that more, brainstorming with clients, talking about what great comms in this space looks like through the lens of the 3PL side of the conversation really does inform how I approach TriplePundit's journalism and our reporting. But I would say, I try to reserve as much of my time for TriplePundit and fostering our editorial as I can. Really love to spend time working with our writers to really develop stories that are not being told elsewhere and really figure out some creative ways to tell those stories for our audience.
That's an interesting straddle that you make. Does the work that you do at 3BL not only inform you, but also make the work that you do at TriplePundit? Does it help educate you and place you in you're in different shoes. At 3BL, you have clients that are asking for more visibility, more focus on their challenges and getting their information and work out there. Not always easy in the sustainability or impact space, but does that help you do a better job at what you're doing as the executive editor at TriplePundit?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Because it is really, especially the past few years, the internet is changing so quickly. So not only the way that we're talking about impact and these conversations, but just the way people get information online is changing so quickly. It's difficult to capture people's attention about much of anything these days, let alone topics that are perceived to be somewhat niche still. Talking about impact topics, it's not always, the hot trending headline or the clickbait that you might find, right? So it's always hard to get people's eyes on this type of stuff. So working with nonprofits and companies to talking to them about their own impact stories, the challenges they're seeing, how they're addressing them, how they're working in their communities and looking to build efficiency in their businesses. It's eye-opening to see what they're doing, but also figuring out new, fresh ways to talk about that will reach audiences and folks will stop and click on is a constant creative exercise that I feel like is really beneficial for what we're doing with clients at 3BL, but it also really just always opens my mind when it comes to how I reflect on telling stories from a purely editorial perspective.
Got it. For our listeners and viewers who've just joined us, we've got Mary Mazzoni with us. She's the executive editor of TriplePundit. To find Mary and her colleagues and all the impactful and great work they're doing in sustainability and impact, please go to triplepundit.com and 3bl.com, 3bl.com. You don't have to stop driving your car or walking your dog or working out with your weights. We're going to put this all in the show notes. Mary, now let's go back to solutions journalism. What's your definition of solutions journalism?
Yes. So solutions journalism, I feel like some folks hear solutions journalism and they think of kind of like good news, look at this puppy that was rescued from the well, like this type of thing. And that's really not kind of what we're going for or what this style of reporting really is. It's kind of just really based on the notion that some might think is radical, but just kind of that solutions to challenges are also newsworthy is really the central idea, interrogating challenges, not just through the lens of the problem, but also how people are working to solve it and what we can learn from them, whether they succeed or not. I think in the sustainability and impact space in particular, a lot of reporting is very problem focused. You hear, oh, the latest report is out. It's worse than we thought. We've got to do all the like, oh gosh, it's time to be really scared, you guys. And there's such a place for that. We have to make people aware of that. There's a huge role of journalism to raise awareness of challenges that are facing our communities and our society. But when we focus so singularly on the challenge, we don't leave a lot of space for what we can do about it. When people read solely problem-focused coverage around sustainability issues like climate change, environmental pollution, social inequality, it's really easy for them to believe that we just don't know what to do about these things. We're at the mercy of waiting for new technologies to be invented or new big systems changes that may or may not ever happen. But when you really look at the evidence, that's not really what's happening here. We do have, for example, in the climate conversation, we could get almost all of the way to capping global temperature rise well below 2 degrees Celsius solely by going in more wholeheartedly on proven climate solutions that we already have at hand today. We don't need to wait for new technology in order to see quick and measurable progress in that area. But reading mainstream coverage, it's often difficult to determine that, right? Audiences often aren't aware of that. And there's actually a really compelling body of peer-reviewed research that documents what solutions journalism means for audiences and how audiences perceive it. When folks view solutions coverage, they're more likely to say things like, I view the problems and challenges facing my community as surmountable. I want to be a part of taking action on these challenges, which is really the kind of spirit that sustainability and impact fields need today. We really need people who do believe these challenges are solvable, who want to learn more about how people are solving them, and who want to be a part of taking action. And it's really compelling to see how audiences respond to solutions journalism in general. And that's what really caught our attention for bringing it into sustainability and corporate responsibility news in particular. It's not a lens that's often used in our field. We think we're the first platform to adopt solutions journalism across all of our reporting for sustainability and corporate responsibility. So it's definitely a perspective that's not often used. And it's one that I think is necessary for folks to get a complete picture of the truth on these issues. Yes, these problems are urgent. We need to take action, but we know a lot of what we can do about these things. We have evidence, we have compelling case studies we can look toward, and we have ideas that we can look to scale. But often we're not hearing enough about them.
So talk about competition. I read a lot and I'm in the sustainability business. I'm in the recycling business. And also the impact business because of this show. How much competition do you really have in your space? Because personally, I don't see a lot out there. What do you see? I mean, we don't have to name names, but is it a crowded field? Not that crowded field in terms of journalism? And are more people coming in or more people exiting?
Yeah, what part of the impetus for us sort of taking this pivot towards solutions journalism, bringing something new, was sort of the awareness that there are so many more players when it comes to reporting on these issues. When TriplePundit first got started, it was kind of 3P, Green Biz, Sustainable Brands, some of the really long-time players that were reporting on these issues, somewhat smaller independent niche publications. Now, most of the major media organizations have reporters on this beat. They are covering corporate responsibility, sustainability, impact investing, social equality, and related topics fairly regularly in their newsrooms. So there is a lot of competition there in terms of there are more people talking about these things, which is great. But I do think it's, as we kind of talked about a bit, so much harder to get your message through on the internet today, particularly if you're not one of the largest organizations out there. It's become so much more difficult, from the rise of AI search results to the way that social media is treating link sharing compared to years past, to kind of some changing technical requirements for things like emails that can make it harder to get your newsletters delivered to your opt-in subscribers. So there are just a lot of factors out there that make it really hard to reach people with any message. But I think it's sustainability in particular. There are more people talking about it now, which I generally view as a positive thing.
Yeah.
But some of these other changes that make it harder for messages in general to reach people, I'm kind of a little less excited about. I think that's something that all of us in media are navigating right.
Tell me, remember, I'm an old guy. I'm 63, and you're a digital native, and the world is, as you say, ever changing when it comes to news delivery, information delivery. Does the world of does the Instagram world and the TikTok world impact your work at 3BL and TriplePundit? And how do you make sure that you're still staying relevant and read and listened to in a world that, like you said, new products and new services are coming online, and people are using them more than ever before?
Yeah, there's such a huge rise now of social media, folks looking towards social media as a news source. There are some reasons why that is, and there are some implications tied to that. But I think when really you think about why are folks looking towards social as a way to get their news, we see declining trust levels in some cases in the media. There are a lot of reasons for that. But when people look to a face on social media, an influencer, they perceive someone they can trust, right? I know this person. I'm in their apartment. I see them getting ready in the morning. When they tell me something, I trust them, right? And I think that really is the biggest commodity today in terms of how we're all exchanging information, is trust. If you're an outlet that folks can trust, folks are much more likely to engage with you. I do think the rise of things like, the social media influencer or short vertical video in general has changed a lot for media as a field. A lot of folks relied on sharing their news to social media. You post a quick link on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and, folks see and reshare. That's just simply not the way folks are absorbing information and exchanging information on social media these days. Link sharing is not really the preferred method of communication on these platforms. Folks are really looking for the video in a lot of cases, and the algorithms are favoring the short vertical video, which can make things tougher for news platforms, right? Just one other area where you're used to being able to draw viewers to your coverage is kind of cut off or is declining. But I really think the central reasons why folks are looking toward a social media influencer, for better or worse, is because they feel like they know that this person and they can trust them. In some cases, we do see misinformation being spread by influencers online. So there are good and bad sides to those things. But I think that when we see a decline in trust in journalism as a field, that's something that we should pay a lot of attention to. What is causing that? What is leading to readers to maybe trust us less and look for other avenues to gain information?
I love it. How about the major media platforms? CNN, Bloomberg, MS Now, Fox, just to name a few, BBC.com and BBC, NHK. Are any of them doing any work in solutions journalism that's exciting, or they're really leaving it more in niche for groups like yours, 3BL and TriplePundit, to handle?
There are, I mean, as I mentioned, there are around 2,000 newsrooms globally that do tell solutions journalism stories. It may not be the only
Right.
style of reporting they use, but they are telling solution stories, including major media organizations. What has actually avenues where solutions journalism has been particularly successful is in a lot of cases local news coverage, major metro dailies, the local affiliates of broadcast stations. They often find that they're searching for a story every day, right? They have to fill the airtime, they have to fill the paper. There are few regular channels of news that are coming to them. One of those big channels in a lot of cities is the police press wire, right? So because of that, it can often bias crime coverage on the local news channels. Local outlets are conscious of this. They don't want to leave people with an impression that crime is all that's happening in their cities. So looking towards solutions journalism as a model has become more popular at a lot of, major metro dailies, major, local news affiliates serve in big cities in the US and globally, because they want to find new ways to elevate often undertold stories about their community that can tell a more complete picture about what's happening. So it is something we see large news organizations doing. We do see kind of the big national outlets telling solutions journalism stories sometimes as well. And I think it's a really positive trend. Again, if we're only problem centering, we miss a lot of other stories that are worthwhile.
Talk a little bit about undercovered areas in the world of impact, solutions, sustainability, circularity. What does undercovered areas mean with regards to the work that you do at 3BL and at TriplePundit?
Yeah, I mean, I really think in general, we're not hearing enough about what's happening to people on a day-to-day basis in communities, what people's real experiences are. We hear a lot about the macro trends, which of course are important, but I feel like it kind of continues to center the conversation around a lot of the same players, right? The wealthiest, the most powerful. If you scan a news feed, you're likely to see the same dozen people's picture over and over again. Likewise, if you search out news on a particular place, you might find a lot of the same coverage, right? You might find coverage about Appalachia that's very centered on, job loss or declining industry. You might find a lot of coverage on, Africa or the Middle East that's very told through the lens of poverty or through conflict. But there's so much more to the human experience of people who are living in these communities that we don't hear about nearly as often. And I think solutions journalism is a really interesting way to approach those types of conversations. It's really about just simply elevating responses to problems. And in a lot of cases, this is happening on a small scale. It's happening at a local level. It's happening with small organizations, small groups of people who have an idea, want to see it through, and are seeing evidence of positive progress. But when we're very much focused on the big picture all the time, how is this going to affect geopolitical issues? How is this going to affect the overlap of issue across economies? These are super important parts of the conversation, but we miss a lot of the people story. We miss a lot about how these issues really make a difference in people's day-to-day lives. And people want to hear about people. Those are really the stories that connect the most. So I think in certain topics, we can start to see audiences disengage or not really want to read about this because they either depresses them or they feel disconnected from it. It's just, this doesn't have anything to do with me or with my life. So I think more of a focus on how people of all walks of life are experiencing some of the issues we cover, how it's making a difference in their lives positively or negatively, and how they're working to address that is something that a lot of mainstream press just doesn't have the time or resource necessarily to always cover. But I do think it's a missing piece that we need to hold on.
Talk a little bit about the challenges of what you do on a day-to-day basis as executive editor. Why is a solutions newsroom different from a traditional newsroom, and some challenges that brings with it?
I mean, time is a big one. Solutions journalism takes time. It feels like there's never enough hours in the day to do all of the things that we'd like to do. It kind of, in an era of high volume journalism, AI driven, like robot reporters, in some cases, it can be tough to keep up when you are being more thorough, when you're being more intentional about seeking out and elevating stories that are original to you that can't be found elsewhere. It naturally takes a lot more time and effort to produce those things. And speaking with editors at other solutions platforms and independent newsrooms more broadly, it's a similar challenge that all of us are sharing, right? It's like we always wish we could clone ourselves and just do more with with what we have, but it always seems to kind of, time is always a bit of a challenge. We're fortunate, compared to a lot of other newsrooms, that we're not as resource constrained as some, because we have a parent company. We're fortunate that we have 3BL's backing. They're able to help us, provide us with resources. There were a lot of other small newsrooms, particularly as ways that we get information evolve, they're having trouble breaking through the noise, and they're really, really struggling. So we're fortunate that we have some assistance with that, but resources are always going to be, challenging when it comes to the news. All of us would always wish our teams were bigger, we could do more, and I think that when it comes to solutions journalism, because our contributors are often so connected to the topics they're covering, they feel the same, like, oh, I wish I could do, 5 stories on this. But, we're all limited by human capacity. So.
Right. Mary, how do you get informed? I mean, you're young, so you're a digital native, and you're in the journalism industry. How do you go through your day in terms of what you're consuming, what you're looking at, what's inspiring you, what's giving you ideas on how to drive some future stories that you think your audience would be interested in at TriplePundit? How do you consume and the inputs and the outputs of what goes through your day to day?
Oh my goodness, I probably read more news than most people should, but it's definitely changing how I get information. I'd say, I was definitely a huge Google News person for many years, really how I got most of my news. But as things shift, I find that a lot of the smaller platforms I enjoyed reading from were not popping up in my Google News feed as frequently anymore. So I really have to go seek those stories out. I subscribe to newsletters. I keep some of my favorite outlets bookmarked, and I really encourage news audiences to do that. If you're like, oh, I remember reading from these guys a couple of years ago, I never see them anymore. If you go to their website, they're probably still publishing, but they may not necessarily be in some of these aggregators that we're used to using or popping up in your For You page on social media. A lot of them are still out there. So I think newsletters, going directly to websites that I follow regularly has helped a lot, just to make sure that I'm kind of like seeing well-rounded things versus kind of the same sources over and over.
Got it. AI, good or bad for what you do?
Oh man, I could get started, but no, I think really AI is changing a ton. And I think there are a lot of positive things. There are some really interesting stories that we've covered about how organizations, communities are using AI to solve sustainability and impact challenges that are super interesting. And when it comes to the media, I think things are a little bit more challenged. When you hear things about AI displacing human workers, AI writing for us, some newsrooms are using robot reporters today, stories that are almost exclusively written by AI. But I still think our jobs are safe when it comes to writers, to be honest. And when I read something that's written by AI, I do think I can tell. It's come to the point that this stuff's been out there for a few years now. There are tells that sneak their way in. And I just feel always a human writer is much better than anything that the machine will produce. And frankly, a lot of it is plagiarizing from copyrighted material. So I will say to any journalists who may be considering pulling copy directly from a chatbot, please do not do that, because you may be unknowingly plagiarizing from another writer. So there is always a factor there. But
Right.
It's in terms of news production, I think there's a place for it. I think we're still finding that place in a lot of cases in the field. Where can we best use AI to do research, to save time, to help us think about things differently without really allowing it to obstruct our creative process when we're writing, or also, frankly, giving of our critical thinking to this machine. We should be thinking, right? Don't outsource that, because that's what makes you and your work special, is what your brain can do. If we don't use it, we lose it, right? So we have to be careful about
That's true. It's really true. Talk a little bit about 3BL. Give an example of a nonprofit that you work with and then a for-profit. You don't have to name names, but what do you do for a for-profit company that's looking for more visibility to increase their client base, to grow their revenue and grow their sales? And then what do you do for nonprofits at 3BL?
Absolutely. Well, 3PL has been around almost as long as TriplePundit. They were founded in 2009 as an impact communications partner for organizations. They have a network of sustainability related websites where organizations can distribute their content, but we also work with our clients, nonprofit and corporate, to help them really identify what's special about their story and tell their story in unique and creative ways that have an opportunity to really break through and connect with those audiences. I will say it's a little bit different when it comes to nonprofits and corporates. They're usually looking to communicate about different things and for different reasons. We don't usually help nonprofits directly to solicit donations, for example. We're more so helping them to raise awareness of all of the positive work that they're doing and the impact that's having on communities. Whether it's conservation organizations, hunger relief organizations, humanitarian organizations. We've worked with a number of super impactful nonprofits who are doing great work in their communities and worldwide. But a lot of people don't really either know about this work, or the only time they really see comms from the nonprofit may be in the context of a donation, a piece of donation. Like, hey, we're looking to fundraise, will you give us, $5, which is great. But you're more prepared to give the organization $5 if you know more about the great work that they're doing, you're excited about them, and you really see them as having a positive impact. And I think in some cases, we're still thinking, oh, well, people will go to our website and they'll find out. Today, the average person is not taken that type of initiative always. Our attention spans are shrinking greatly. So I think it really becomes about meeting people in various places they're gathering online with your message, and then hoping that over time that will really start to stick with people. And I think it's similar for corporates, right? Where it's really looking to reach out to people on these sustainability and impact focused websites where folks are already coming to learn about these topics. They're already prepared to read about sustainability. Putting corporate stories in that context automatically gives it a bit of third-party validation, right? But I think what really stands out most about how we work with corporate customers is really a lot of back and forth around what's special about your story, right? A lot of folks are kind of focused on similar topics. We all want to help our communities. We want to improve efficiency in our organizations. But the way in which each organization does that is very much different. Having talked to many leaders across sectors, each organization really does approach these conversations pretty differently. So it's interesting to identify and to lift up what's special about those stories so they can really stand out more, because we're really all in kind of a war for eyeballs out there. So it's really about kind of how can you quickly articulate what makes your story special and what you're most excited about. So it's kind of a little bit of a tweak on how we do that depending on the organization, but it's kind of a similar.
Do you do more for-profit companies or more nonprofits at 3BL? Do you handle?
We do more corporates for sure. We have a lot of Fortune 500 companies in our book of business. There are a lot of large organizations who are looking to communicate about these topics today, even under the current political environment that we're in. The data continues to support, and we continue to see that organizations are still very much focused on these topics. They think they're important in terms of how their customers and employees perceive them, and they want to keep talking about it. So we're mostly corporate. I'd say about 20% nonprofit NGO in our book.
The great message I think you just shared is that the environment's here to stay. The world is here to stay, and it's our job to be a good steward of it. Administrations come and go.
Yes.
So, and being good stewards, both as people and as corporations go, I think everyone realizes these trends of circularity and of material resource recovery are not going anywhere. They're only growing, actually. And so that's a positive, net positive.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we see that, particularly globally, right? There's so much interest in these topics, and we're fortunate to have some new contributors have come on board over the past year or so who are based in Africa, who are based in parts of the Middle East and Asia. And they're really telling such fantastic stories about what their communities are doing to almost not completely bypass, but in a lot of cases kind of jump over some of those challenges that Western nations were dealing with in the fossil fuel economy, right? They're not completely leapfrogging fossil fuels, but they're doing things differently from the start than what the US, Europe, and some countries have been doing. So it's really interesting to see that perspective of what's happening within communities globally beyond the conventional stories that we often hear.
So funny you say that. I was in, we're opening up a facility in the Emirates. And so the people who we're partnering with said, we want to take you and show you one of our investments and one of the ventures we're very proud of. So they drove me out about in Dubai. They drove me 30 minutes from downtown to the largest waste to energy facility on the planet. Now, I watch Bloomberg and all the other platforms out there, and I read great publications like yours, and which I love, and it inspires me and informs me. But here I am, never even heard of this waste energy, and there it is in the middle of the Emirates, where you think it's all fossil, and all these great corporations are just focused on oil and gas. And the truth, it couldn't be more opposite. They're focusing on new forms of energy and new forms of sustainability and sustainable practices almost more than anyone else on the planet right now. And it's just so inspiring to see that different regions are coming up with massive success stories that are not getting classically covered by our traditional media sources.
I mean, absolutely. And in a lot of cases, it's not even just a challenge of how we're covering these things, but if it's being covered at all. The most recent report from Media Matters, I think it was around 13 hours of climate coverage across all broadcast television in all of 2024. So when you have 13 hours, you're naturally going to miss a lot, right? It's probably going to be what you think is the most important thing, or the catchiest headline. Hey, the report's out, guys. It's worse than we thought. That's what you have time and space for. And so by not leaving space for some of these other conversations, we miss teaching people really the truth about what's happening with these issues. It's not that, hey, it's really terrible and we have no idea what to do. We're doing it in communities across the world. We are doing it today. And there's a lot that we can learn through the course of doing it.
Tracking your history, the history of TriplePundit and 3BL, tracking the history of my company, ERI, 20 years approximately, both have been around. When TriplePundit started and 3BL started, the term chief sustainability officer barely existed. There was no iPhone. Remember, again, everyone thinks everything's been around forever. Google was just started in 98, the iPhone 2007. These are all relatively new, including this world of sustainability and circularity and all these important topics and impact. So are you now, is this the star turn for TriplePundit and 3BL? Are we at that time? Is there so much interest in this space now that you're covering, that you've climbed this mountain for 20 years, but are you about to have your Netflix or NVIDIA moment where everyone now starts saying, we do need to get informed, and we need to know more stories about good things that are happening on this planet, solutions that exist, when everyone historically has thrown up their arms and say, we can't recycle single-use post-consumer plastic. Not true anymore. We can't recycle concrete. Not true anymore. We can't recycle electronics, the fastest growing solid waste stream in the world. Not true anymore. Everything is turned on its head. Sustainability is not just a quick fad. It's a trend, and circularity is a trend, and they're here to stay. And your generation is going to continue to grow them. Is this good news for TriplePundit and 3BL? And where do you see the business of solutions journalism going in the next 5 years or 3 years even?
I do think we've reached or surpassed a tipping point when it comes to people's appetite for this information, particularly younger generations, but not exclusively. You hear certain politicians or business people speak of it, you'd think, oh my gosh, the field is dead. We're dead and buried. We just don't know it yet. But really, when I speak with readers, when I speak with editors, it's a completely different story. Folks are looking for this information. They're intentionally pursuing information about sustainability and social impact. When you look on places like social media, sustainable living influencers are booming. You see a ton of people who are giving people advice on practical tips to reduce impact in your own life. People are looking for this information. They have a huge appetite for it. I think in a lot of cases, they're not finding the stories they really hoped that they could find. And I do think that for the field in general, solutions journalism has a major role to play in giving audiences more of what they're looking for. We've seen a really fantastic reception since we've made the pivot to solutions journalism at TriplePundit. In our last audience surveys last year, around 3/4 of our readers used negative terms to describe the news at large. They said it made them feel sad or overwhelmed or anxious. And this was the majority opinion we were getting back from our audiences. Around 90% used positive terms to describe how they felt after reading our solutions reporting, in a lot of cases of the same issues, using words like informed, hopeful. These are the ways we want to leave the audience, because if people are shut off, you're not going to be able to reach them. These stories are really important to tell, but how we tell them does have an impact on how audiences receive it. I think that folks have been hearing the urgency message, the somewhat doom and gloom message for a number of years. I think a lot of folks have realized and are aware of the urgency at this point. Now they want to see what's next. What can I do about this? I understand the urgency. I know we have to do something. What do I do? What are people doing that has worked? And I think that, solutions journalism is naturally geared toward that type of coverage and those type of stories that I really do think audiences are curious about and are seeking.
A lot of young people watch our show, high school, college, post, university, and they're trying to figure out, they want to be like you, Mary. And I always say that with kindness and care and greatest respect, in terms of you get to make a nice living and pay your bills, which we all have to do. No shame in saying that. But you also get to make an impact, a positive impact every day. You're doing great impact work and making the world a better place. People want to be like that. That the new generation cares about not just making a paycheck and keeping the lights on, but making a difference. What would you suggest in terms of industries that are not only undercovered by journalism, but undercovered by entrepreneurs? If we were going to advise the next generation of entrepreneurs that want to go and impact, should they go into clean water? Should they go into more energy, nuclear energy? Should they be going into what should they be focusing on in terms of the next gen of exciting solutions that are needed to be not only invented, but more importantly, scaled, not only just in North America, but as you know, it's a borderless world now, especially when it comes to the environment, but around the world. What are some industries that are underdone that you would suggest some of our young listeners around the world to be looking into to go make an impact?
So I'll answer this in two parts, one that's kind of more philosophical and one that's a bit more practical.
Absolutely.
But kind of more philosophically speaking, I might butcher this quote a bit, but a quote that stuck out to me and always really inspired me from Kurt Vonnegut actually was that one of the most profound things you can do with your life is finding a way that the disease of loneliness can be cured. And we see that loneliness is an epidemic, right, in our nation, in our world. In the age of social media, we're disconnected from each other. We're struggling to reach people and to connect on a human level. Finding ways to bring people together around causes they're passionate about and believe can work is such a beautiful thing that will always give you purpose, regardless of the field or what you're talking about. And I think we're kind of almost in such a hyper competitive mindset these days, right? If you were to found a startup, you're like, oh, how can I disrupt this? How can I beat the other guy, right? And of course, you have to think that way in order to be successful. But in a lot of cases, how can you join with other people? How can you create community? And how can we push this boulder up the hill together? It's such a powerful perspective that's not often the first thing that people think about, right? So I think that finding ways to get with others who are already in this space, figure out how you can support and assist them and really be a part of the solutions they're pushing forward is such a big part of this, right? That sense of community, I think, is often missing from the conversations we have about this, but it's such an essential piece of them. And really, practically, sustainability careers, I think, will ebb and flow, right? Depending on how organizations are staffing, on certain workplace trends. You may or may not, in your first job out of college, land a sustainability or impact specific role. But that does not mean that your role can't have purpose, that you can't have a positive impact on your organization through the lens of sustainability or impact topics. Your voice matters. You can always put an idea out there, speak with your supervisor, put your hand up when it comes to projects and bring a different perspective that is centered on positive impact, regardless of the role or industry that you end up in. So I think that, folks who want to pursue impact careers absolutely should. There's so much space in this field for new people who are excited about it and who want to push progress forward. But even if you don't land, a sustainability job in your first out of college, there's so much more that you can do. And there are so many ways that impact shows up. It's out of its silo in a lot of organizations now. So you can play an impact role in many departments of organizations today compared to maybe 10 or 15 years.
I love it, Mary. Mary, I just want to say, in the great tradition of having Nick on and Leon, it's been absolutely delight having you on, and I want you to feel always welcome to come back on the show and continue this shared journey, this very important and impactful shared journey that Nick and Leon laid the way for you to come on board now and take it to the next level. Thank you for spending time with us today. It's very clear that the world needs more Mary Mazzonis. Let's just say that. For our listeners and viewers to find Mary and her colleagues and all the important work they're doing, please subscribe to TriplePundit.com, TriplePundit.com, and also you can look up 3BL.com. It will be in the show notes as well. Mary Mazzoni, thank you for not only spending an hour with us today in the Impact Podcast, but more importantly, thank you for making the world a better place.
Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate it.
This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by Engage. Engage is a digital booking platform revolutionizing the talent booking industry. With thousands of athletes, celebrities, entrepreneurs, and business leaders, Engage is the go-to spot for booking talent, for speeches, custom experiences, live streams, and much more. For more information on Engage or to book talent today, visit letsengage.com. This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by ERI. ERI has a mission to protect people, the planet, and your privacy, and is the largest fully integrated IT and electronics asset disposition provider and cybersecurity-focused hardware destruction company in the United States, and maybe even the world. For more information on how ERI can help your business properly dispose of outdated electronic hardware devices, please visit eridirect.com.